Hi, this is Marco Gomez. I'm a New York State licensed real estate associate broker. I've put this video together to explain the complicated form that is known as the New York State disclosure form for buyer and seller, also commonly referred to as an agency disclosure form. This form is a legally mandated form by the New York State Department of State, Division of Licensing Services. The form was created to better inform buyers and sellers of residential real property in the state of New York what exactly their relationship is with the real estate agent, whether that's a salesperson or a broker that they're working with. The form, again, is legally mandated, and this video is going to cover exactly what the different parts of this form mean, as most of us are not attorneys and it's not very easy to understand. So let's get started. The first section that you see here is the New York State Department of State logo, and as I mentioned, they are the ones that put this form out. You can see where they're located, and if you ever have any questions, you can call their customer service number or go on to the website specified in this form. Now, as I mentioned, this form is for both buyers and sellers. The next section shows us that this is not a contract. This form is not a legally binding contract. It is only here to disclose to you how the real estate agent that you're working with is representing you. That is regards to relationships, whether you are a customer or a client. Now we actually get into the different types of relationships. Here you see a seller's agent. A seller's agent, bottom line, is someone who's hired by the seller to represent their best interest. You do this by signing a contract with them to sell the home at a predetermined price and on terms acceptable to the seller, who is your client. You owe them undivided loyalty, reasonable care, confidentiality, full disclosure, and obedience, as well as duties to account. So the bottom line is a seller's agent has to represent the seller's best interest, not anyone else's. Now on the flip side of seller's agent, there's the buyer's agent. A buyer's agent is an agent who is engaged or hired by a buyer to represent their best interest. Buyer's agents do this by negotiating the purchase price of a home at a price and on terms acceptable to the buyer. A buyer's agent also has the following fiduciary duties: to the buyer, reasonable care, undivided loyalty, confidentiality, full disclosure, obedience, and duty to account. A buyer's agent does not represent the interest of the seller. Let me make that very clear. A buyer's agent does not represent the interest of the seller. The next section on the agency form is broker's agents. A broker's agent technically is an agent that is engaged or cooperates with either a listing agent or with a buyer's agent. They do not work with the buyer or the seller directly, and neither the listing or buyer's agent are responsible for the acts of the broker's agent. Again, and they do not also have a relationship directly with the buyer or the seller. So this is one that we technically try to never use, as we like to establish a relationship with either the buyer or the seller. So be careful, because broker's agency is not commonly used. The next section we're going to cover is dual agency. Dual agency occurs when a real estate broker may represent both the buyer and the seller in the transaction, as long as both have given their informed consent in writing. In a dual agency situation, the agent really can't provide the full range of fiduciary duties to the buyer and the seller. For example, if you're representing both parties, you can't say to the seller, well, I know the buyers are willing to go up another $10,000, because you're already privy to that information and you're representing them. Likewise, you cannot tell the buyer, I know the seller is really looking to get out of the house, because you're representing them as well. So you're really there to pass back and forth the offers. Offer seller went up this much, the buyer came up this much, these are the terms. You really can't disclose anything about either side, or else you're violating your dual agency. So dual agencies should really not be used by you, the buyer, or the seller when hiring an agent, unless you're fully aware of it and have discussed it with your attorney. Now we get to dual agents with designated sales agent. Like dual agency, this part of the form just states that we can have informed consent to dual agency. So when you represent a client whether it's a buyer or seller, they can upfront let you know that it's okay to have dual agency and who's going to represent each party. The only caveat is that, like regular dual agency, the designated sales agent cannot provide the full range of fiduciary duties to the buyer or the seller. That's why this is something that sellers and buyers may want to consider carefully, as there are possible consequences of dual agency that they do not want to deal with. Again, I recommend that this be avoided if at all possible. Now let's get into an example of what the form should look like, completely filled out, when a real estate agent is representing the seller's interest or acting as the listing agent. The first thing that would be filled out would be the name of the agent. In this case, I put my name there, Marco Gomez, the firm I represent, Keller Williams Landmark II. I would check off seller and then check off seller's agent. This way you clearly know who I'm representing. The next section that would be filled out would be the names of the sellers, John or Jane Doe. We would check off the box that says sellers. The signature is of the sellers. The seller would sign on the first line, seller 1, and if there was an additional seller, it would be on the second line. And then the last thing would be just to date it. And this is what a completely filled out form for representing the seller should look like. Now, if you did choose to go with dual agency with designated sales agents and you are the seller, this is what the form should look like if that was the scenario you wanted to have. The only difference from the previous form was that you would check off advance informed consent to dual agency, and then you would designate an agent. Here I would just put one of the gentlemen on my team, Robert, to represent the buyer and myself to represent the seller in the transaction. Now, if you're the buyer and you're looking to hire someone to represent your best interest and negotiate on your behalf and find you the home on your terms, then the form would look like this. This is what a buyer agency form would look like. You would see that the agent's name is there again, the office. We would check off buyer, buyer's agent, and then the name of the buyers, as well as their signatures on the first and second line if there were two, and we would date the document. This is what a completely filled out form should look like when someone is representing a buyer. Now, on the flip side of the seller's dual agency, there's the buyer's dual agency that we discussed. So if you wanted to hire a buyer's agent, which I highly recommend, you would have the form filled out with the agent's name, the firm, buyer, buyer's agent, just as before, and here you would give advanced informed consent to dual agency. So you would have an agent that's representing the buyer and an agent representing the seller in the transaction, as well as the buyer's names, John or Jane Doe, the buyer's signature, 1 and 2, and the checking off the buyer signed, and you would date it. And this is what a completely filled out form for an agent representing a buyer with advanced informed consent to dual agency should look like. Thank you again for your time. And this form, along with many others, are available on our website at www.soldbymarkg.us. That's www.soldbymarkg.us, or you can always give us a call at 917-734-2012. Thank you so much, and I look forward to meeting you soon.